please believe me, there are so many new technologies, frameworks, best practices, points of views, ways to go about the things that you know how to do well that I believe you should learn and apply. And the only way you can do that is study every single day and learn every single day and have the bandwidth to test these new things out. And so that's also something I do as well.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to human resources innovators about innovation in the world of HR. If you're a people leader or you're looking for a new way to think about how to help others be successful, this is the podcast for you. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, I am extremely excited to welcome back AJ Vaughan, a man who probably needs no introduction if you heard his episode. He certainly made an impression on me, and I'm really excited that he has agreed to come back onto the Rebel HR podcast. So for those of you that don't remember, AJ runs the E1B2 Collective, which is a collection of 6 different brands, all intended to improve the world of work. We're going to be talking about Project 2030 today. Welcome back, AJ.
Thank you so much, Kyle. How are you?
You know, I got no complaints. I'm happy. I'm healthy. It's not snowing outside anymore. So, life's good. How about you?
Things are well. The rain has been crazy over here in Maryland, but things are working out. I got engaged recently, so that's fun.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, we were doing some venue shopping here today. I think we landed on the spot. So,
oh, man. I've been married for a while. I don't miss the wedding planning.
Yeah. I'm leaving 99.9% of that up to her. I'm a little bit of a style type guy. So the only thing I'm worrying about a lot is how my suit's going to look. And I'm really big on vibes. So I'm big on music and lights and aesthetics. And I like to dabble in drinking here and there. So got to have some good bourbon on tap, maybe.
Yes, that's an interesting question. So, you're a founder, you're a CEO. How much do you delegate some of that stuff? It sounds like you're on the right track.
Yeah, I'm delegating every single bit of it for the most part, besides those things.
Besides the stuff you care, that's probably good. It's I tell people, I have 2 CEOs. I have the one that pays me, and the one that really matters. That's my wife.
There you go.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, congratulations. Love to hear some of that exciting news. So it's been a hot minute since we last spoke. So what have you been up to?
Yeah, I'll try to keep that tight. I've been up to a lot here. For those that maybe didn't listen, I run the E1B2 Collective. Like you said, it's a holding company. It's a collective and collection of a lot of different brands. And so I've just been working really hard, trying to, I think, do a couple of different things. Being as though I'm kind of a hybrid, a lot of bit of an entrepreneur, a lot of bit of a people operations type guy. So I've been trying to just stay really grounded and study and research. I've also taken part of a lot of active consulting internships. I know that's a weird format. So pretty much I was feeling my skills atrophy a little bit. And as a people operations practitioner, rather than an entrepreneur of people operation things. It's very different if you didn't know, anyone listening. And so I've actually found a couple different companies saying, you don't have to pay me anything. You get me for 10 hours a week and I will do anything you ask for free. I just want to be exposed to day-to-day, week-to-week problems inside of a company. And so that's been fun. And then, been running all these companies, man. We're up to about 20 folks across all the brands. 2 of them are going through some acquisitions, cross our fingers. And and then of course, writing, speaking, the whole 9. So been working.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Not a lot of weekends off, it doesn't sound like.
Definitely not.
That's a question. Do you actually get weekends? Does that word exist in your vocabulary?
On the weekend, I do a 7:30 to 3 type day. Sure. And then, from 3 on, it's time to spend some time with the fiance, kind of lay low. And then I might pick up the computer again at 9 or 10, just looking over some things. Sundays are a little bit heavier, but I'm always thinking about it. So it's like an active rest time for those athletes out there. It's like an active rest, but never a full Friday, computers closed until Monday morning type thing.
Right. I get that. I think a lot of people in the world of people kind of get that too, right? It's like, gosh, I remember the days when I had a job where I was able to clock out and leave it behind because I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're dealing with people and when you're dealing with ideas and you're dealing with, how do I solve a problem that I've never solved before? You can't just shut your brain off and not think about it. Like,
no, you cannot.
I get that. I think, that's a great example of, I think, some of the challenges that people face, trying to find balance in a world where, a lot of work's now remote, virtual, and it's right in front of them. You really can't walk away from it. So definitely something that, I get that. I feel that.
And I think it's more of like the entrepreneurial lens as well. For anyone listening, I would think if you are kind of internal, you may not want to walk away from it, but I think, frankly, you should. I think you should force yourself to not engage too much after Friday. I think maybe I shouldn't use that macro statement. I mean, everyone can do what they want to do, but I think it's healthy to step back a little bit. I think for me, just the way I've decided to design my life, I mean, this is it. I call myself an independent. I don't call myself a full-fledged entrepreneur / business owner quite yet, because I don't know, my terminology of that is like kind of like what I think I used to have. I think my terminology around that is like, if you have 50 full-time employees and like a lot of revenue going on. But right now I look at myself as more of like an independent, and AKA like I'm independently generating income for myself and those that are closely around me. And to do that, you have to work very hard from an hour perspective. So
sure. It's interesting. I was having this conversation over the weekend with a couple of really good friends, and we were talking about someone's motivations and what makes them tick, and we were all coming from such different points. One of my friends is very much I'm not going to work on Fridays. I'm not on this earth to work. I'm on this earth to exist and to live and to build, my family and spend time and enjoy it. And that's his paradigm. My other friends a little closer to retirement, kind of like, listen, I'm good. I'm working smarter. I'm not working harder. Got a finite time period left, and I'm good. And I'm the guy sitting here thinking, I just love the game. I like work because it's fun, and as weird as that may sound to some people, my motivation is trying to figure out this Rubik's Cube that is people and business and win. But that's just my wiring,
No, likewise. I think with my athletic background, I kind of agree. Though I will say, like, I'll give you a really practical example, and I'll be very candid and transparent here. When I had my first two companies and they were successful financially, I would always say at the point that I'm at now, which is 31, and I used to say this to myself when I was 19, 22, 23, I would always say I'd be a millionaire liquid, meaning I could open up my bank account and I would see millions of dollars there, not run a 7-figure company. And it's now changed a little bit. I'm a little bit different now when it comes to that thinking. I'm a little bit more like you now. I just love the game so much, and what I need financially from it doesn't necessarily need to be that. It needs to be enough to sustain a certain lifestyle that I desire, but I think it's more or less just trying to create value. And again, there's just something about the quote unquote game that I love, but it definitely changes.
Sure. Yeah. I think it is interesting. Careers change so much. Your mindset changes so much. And one of the things that we spoke about here a few weeks ago was, kind of how somebody's approach to their career path could be shaped. Specifically, we were talking about people who are in an HR generalist role or an HR manager role and want to kind of ascend to a CHRO role or a VP HR role or something like that, where, they've got kind of that hunger, that motivation, and how different that may be for some folks. And I know that's part of what you're working on with your Project 2030 cohort. So kind of walk us through what you're doing and how you're approaching people's, motivation to get to that level.
Yeah. So I'll start from the very beginning, but I'll keep it somewhat tight with the story. So I've spoken at about 17 SHRM chapters inside of universities and speaking to the graduate students. So these aren't the, the 19, 20, 21-year-olds. These are the folks that sometimes are in their 40s, they're in their 20s, they're in their 30s, whatever the case is going to be. And I've had an honor to do that at some pretty respected universities. And what I realized very quickly was two main things. Number one, a lot of the information they were teaching, and this is connected to Sherman, and there's no knock on Sherman. I love Sherman. A lot of the information is amazing. But a lot of the information they were teaching, they were preparing these folks to be generalists, specialists, HR managers at best. They weren't teaching them a lot of, I think, the fun things. And I'll give you a couple examples. They weren't getting into internal communications. They weren't getting into DE&I. They weren't getting into talent development. They weren't getting into career mapping. They weren't getting into kind of the executive coaching aspect. They weren't getting into organizational psychology and human behavior and all these things. And so they weren't getting into, I think, what is, number one, a little bit more fun. Number two, what's a little bit more important to understand how to execute, being the person that's going to hold the title of impacting the people. Because if you could understand those things, that's when you can really scale things up. I think what Sherm was inevitably teaching at that stage is kind of just what to do to be in compliance, to maintain the structure of the organization, and frankly, to survive, right? Maybe to optimize productivity a little bit, but I don't think it was really getting into some of the more creative things. So that was the first thing that I realized, right? And then I said, this is interesting. Let me ask a few of these students here if they have a desire to be in this HR space for a long period of time. And then I quickly realized they all were very fascinated by this chief people officer, CHRO, head of people title. And then what I found that was very interesting is all of them said, I have no idea how I would even get there. I have no idea. And then I had one student actually say, seriously, I have no idea, because from my time that I've been spending in this space, which is the last 7 years, and then another person raised their hand there, said my time I've been spending, which is the last 12 years. And then another person said my time that I've been spending the last year, it's been a lot of individual contributor type work. It's been a lot of, again, compliance, legal, just really structured HR operational type work. They said, how do we even get to that stage? They said the folks that I report to, AKA the CHROs, they seem so much bigger and grander and more strategic and thoughtful than I can even imagine to be. And so that's when it hit me, Kyle. I was like, this is an interesting issue. And so long story short, what the Project 2030 brand is, in very simple format, is I believe the learning curve from being a generalist or a specialist or even an HR business partner to becoming a CHRO or a chief people officer, which is a very strategic role, I believe that learning curve is very steep, number one. Number two, I believe a lot of HR folks need to start thinking about professional branding themselves earlier in the process, because it creates opportunity. It creates a little bit of an aura, and quote unquote, I'm a young guy, so I'm going to use this word here, creates a little bit of a swag, if you will, around you. And it creates an ability to network at scale to find the right opportunities. And then I think the last thing connected to the right opportunities, I think these types of folks need a little bit of an understanding of what type of stage, size, problems internally of the companies that they will be the best fit for. And so everything I just said has been curated and designed for anyone that's thinking about making the jump to being a CHRO, VP, or head of people for the very first time in their career. And Kyle, I guess I'll throw you in here. If you remember when I first introduced this to you, I asked you kind of directly, I said, hey, Kyle, do you think there was something maybe you would have wished you would have done that would have helped you navigate that learning curve? And I'm not exactly sure what you said, but I remember something along the lines of, I remember you saying that it was a steep one. And that's the gist of it. I've ranted enough, and I'm sure you have questions.
No, it's good. It's really interesting and something that, I'm sure our listeners will be curious to learn more about. But, at the end of the day, it's almost like there's such a gap between your first, entry level HR role, and, maybe that's in a big corporation, and then going into maybe a role that's a little bit more expanded and kind of, learning it as you go. But it's a huge jump to go from, you mentioned individual contributor, or a role where maybe you have a team that's like 2 or 3 people, but then to go into a senior level leadership for dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people and be the culture owner, the learning and development owner, compliance on the employee side, the decider on things like benefits and compensation, like those are critical decisions that are made at the business level. And if the wrong ones are made, the ripple effect is massive. And I think most of us kind of had to figure it out on the fly. I think there is also a reason why you see a lot of CHROs come out of operational roles or legal roles where, they have breadth of knowledge outside of the HR pyramid. And I think you're hitting on something. I think it hits on the leadership piece. And I've said this for years. My first job out of college was an operational leader of a $50 million retail store.
Yep.
And had I not had what I call leadership boot camp early in my career and gone through it was hard, very hard. And I had to learn how to lead large teams. And then I actually stepped back into HR and led very small teams. But I had that operational exposure. Had I not had that, I don't think I would be where I am today. I think I would really, really struggle.
I couldn't agree more. It's a steep learning curve. And, and something else that I want to add, Kyle, that I didn't even kind of mention here, it's even more around, and this is why it's underneath of the E1B2 Collective kind of banner. It's even more around educating and reshaping what I think the CHRO in the future should look like. So that's where the Project 2030 comes into place. Everyone asks me, what the hell is Project 2030? Like, why did you name it that? It's more or less also kind of like my own point of view baked into what I want to see more in the world. So a lot of the things you mentioned, I think a lot of folks can get stuck. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of folks can get in a really weird and odd situation where they've understood legal, they've understood compliance, they've understood benefits, they've understood a lot of different areas of the HR function at such a high level that they inevitably can either move up to the highest ranks, or maybe they're coming from another department, as you mentioned, within operations, but they're still doing it from an older playbook. What I think is also something I'm trying to bake in here is I think there's a new version of a CHRO or a chief people officer that we need to look at and respect. I think because what I don't want to see is I don't want to see CHROs that just understand the benefits playbook for contextual to this organization, contextual to the industry, and they're just overseeing that traditional playbook within a team of folks that are running that department. That's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see someone that say, hey, I just know it like the back of my hand, and I'm the best one in the organization that has the most amount of knowledge in this particular domain. What I want to see is I want to start seeing more CHROs push it a little bit further and start to get outside the box, creative, more humanistic, putting employees first, extracting data from employees, and then using that to make more strategic conversations. And so, for example, I'll give a little quick plug to a company. Compt is a really creative startup that is revolutionizing the employee benefits space. And I want to see CHROs even know that exists. Don't just use the old playbook here. I believe being a CHRO is you are now the chief, the leader, the person that is supposed to have their pulse and their finger on all things innovative within this space, not just the one that knows how to execute the old school model and playbook the best.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
And now, a word from our sponsors. When Molly, Patrick, and I started to figure out how to start our own podcast, we didn't know where to start. Thankfully, we found Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout makes it super easy for us to upload our episodes, track our listeners, and get listed on all the major podcast networks. Today's a great day to start your own podcast. I know that you're one of our listeners, so you've definitely got something to say. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed in all the major podcast directories within minutes of finishing your recording. Podcasting isn't that hard when you have the right partner, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. And now, for listeners of Rebel HR, you can get a $20 Amazon gift card sent to you from Buzzsprout by clicking in the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Are you looking to grow your personal brand or your business brand? Take it from me that podcasts are a great way to do it. Here's the secret. We all want to feel connected to the brands that we buy from. What better way to humanize a brand than through sharing your personal story on a podcast? I have had great success with Kitcaster. Kitcaster is a podcast booking agency that specializes in developing real human connections through podcast appearances. And let me tell you, it's all about the right human connection. You can expect a completely customized concierge service from their staff of communication experts. Kitcaster is your secret weapon in podcasting for business. Your audience is waiting to hear from you. For a limited time offer, listeners to the Rebel HR podcast can go to www.kitcaster.com/rebel to get a special offer for friends of the podcast. Rebel on. Interesting. I think you just summed up our podcast.
Yeah, right.
But honestly, that's why we started this. It's all about, I think about it kind of like in the terms of capitalism, it's creative destruction. It's the fact that if we continue to operate in the same way that we always used to, eventually that way of operating will become extinct because the world changes too quickly. So a great example of that, I think that thesis being proven at least partially true, is just look at the issues that we're having in the world of hiring and retaining talent right now. I mean, people are demanding more from their employer, and it's not just more money. That's part of it. There's a number of things related to wage inflation, but they're demanding companies to have ESG goals, environmental, social, and governance goals that are then, quantifiable and adhered to. And the organizations that don't get ahead of the curve right now are going to be at a disadvantage because people want more.
Yep.
I agree 100% that you can't just be the person that makes sure you don't get sued. There's obviously an element of compliance and risk that needs to be a focus. You have to have some risk management in your enterprise level. But I tell people all the time, if you do anything purely because you're afraid that you might get sued, your focus is in the wrong place.
Yep. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I'll never forget. It's like going through a training, I think it was an interview training, and a manager's like, well, we can't say this and we can't say that because we don't want to get sued. And I'm like, how about you just don't ask it because it's not appropriate to ask? Like that's an intrusive question to ask. Like it's just kind of a jerk move. Like, let alone somebody filing a negligent hiring lawsuit. No, just don't be a jerk.
Exactly.
It's not that. Yeah, I mean, come on. But no, I'm with you. But I do think that a lot of organizations are going to struggle with that. I think that a lot of management teams don't view HR that way. I think that, to your comment, trying to find the right organizations, the right fit, the right size for folks is critical. So how are you approaching that challenge? Like trying to figure out, okay, how do I figure out the best fit?
So without getting into too much of the details, because that would be an entire kind of podcast within itself, I do want to touch on that macro thesis. So we kind of categorize that within this category we call career pathing. And so I think what we do, the very first thing we do is we really unpack. And actually, let me take a step back, Kyle. Let me say this, because I've been getting a lot of heat from this, from folks that I've connected with trying to find introductions to fill up this first cohort. Let me be on the record. I am nothing more than the founder and thought leader of this company. I am a 31-year-old man that has built brands, that has held this title, and I think I have an interesting point of view. But the folks that are going to be executing and delivering the content, they are active right now in the moment, CHROs, heads of people, chief people officers, or previous 10, 15, 20 years in that role. So let me just put that out there as a disclaimer, because rightfully so, I've been getting a little bit of heat from folks thinking that I am the one delivering the content. I am not the one. Now, I will say I am the one that has baked out the macro thesis of this, and I have baked out with my partner, Laura, what the curriculum should be, along with all of the feedback and support I've been getting from my network. I am that guy, but just want to put that as a disclaimer. But moving in now to the career mapping atmosphere and the career pathing atmosphere, the very first thing we're going to do in that section is we're going to have a one-on-one interview and a one-on-one conversation with active CHROs, with some of the folks that are going to be in the cohort, and say the following. Let me lay out all the different types of sizes, companies, problems, issues, things that companies may go through. Example, case in point. Maybe there's a company that's really looking for the first time to dive deep into people analytics. Maybe there's a company that's been having, at the global scale, a lot of compliance and legal issues over the last 18 months. Maybe there's a company that's been having significant turnover issues due to a lack of manager training or a lack of career mapping infrastructure and opportunities. Maybe the executives in the company are having horrible kind of NPS scores and things of that nature. Thus, there needs to be some training. So long story short, what we want to do first and foremost is we want to teach and educate folks around, here are the different types of sizes of companies, problems companies may be having, intricate aspects inside the companies, things that these organizations need. And here's how you're going to go about doing an audit of yourself and figure out how you may fit in with those companies. Because, Kyle, you may be able to resonate with this. There are different types of folks that look like us in this space. I know for me, you're going to have to create a really interesting role for me. I'll be very transparent. With my last role as the head of people, I had decision-making bandwidth and reporting structures that every manager and executive inside the company, outside the CEO, reported to me within certain categories. So they reported to me when it came to certain areas around internal communications, or how they showed up on behalf of their people, or how they showed up during leadership moments, or like I had the ability to remove a CFO out of the company if he or she did not show up in the best way to get the most productivity out of one of their direct reports. And there were ways that I would measure that and understand that. Because what I did, Kyle, is I walked into the organization saying, I'm the one researching every day. I'm the one that understands the people in this company and the overall space of people operations the most. So what gives a CFO or a COO, or even for that matter, a CEO, more power to remove someone from the organization than I do? If I'm noticing a CFO or a manager doing something that is clearly causing, alignment issues, a drop off in productivity, that are more emotional and that are more leadership based and that are more communication based, and I know a lot about that work, after I try to support them and develop them, if I no longer can, we should not just keep them because they're great at their tactical executions of their job. I should have the domain to fire them. And so the punchline is this. In the career pathing and mapping conversations, we're going to go through size of companies, scenarios of the problems companies may be having. And then the most important thing we're going to do is we're going to allow them to and teach them how to do an audit, a self-audit and a self-awareness exercise to figure out, what do you actually care about right now within your career as you prepare for this first role? I know I did a long rant, but I don't know if that was helpful.
No, it's, here's what's really interesting, AJ, for me. So I kind of had to learn that the hard way. And, the story there. So my first HR job was for one of the largest retailers in the country, 300,000 plus employees. And that job taught me so much. One of those things being, I don't want to work for a company this large and this slow to move. And the truth is that I couldn't move the needle much. to the point, and I still tell people, the day that I decided this isn't for me is the day that I got a document in the mail that said, this is how you need to organize your office. This binder holds Department of Labor forms. This binder holds X. And it goes on this shelf and this. And I'm like, you're really telling me where to put paperwork in my office? But you know what? For somebody who's much more aligned with that type of thinking and that type of structure, that could be the perfect fit. Yep. I would tell you, for me, I got to have some novelty. I like change. I like dynamism. I need to be able to make some movement, and I want to be able to make an impact wherever I'm at. And so, so my career path got progressively smaller and smaller companies. And now I'm at a company right now where I love it. It's fun. It's dynamic. It's hard, and it's not structured. So like my job is trying to find the right balance between structure and unstructured, and bureaucracy and eliminating bureaucracy. And it's a ball, man. I just have fun, and I'm truly coming to work and having a good time as opposed to being a cog in the wheel. But for me personally, I had to discover that through my own journey. Had somebody come to me 10 years ago and said, listen, man, your profile does not fit this organization, you need to start a long and strategic search for the right type of role. I think that would have been really critically helpful for me. And I think for anybody listening to this who is trying to figure that out, it's a really gray concept to grasp. But I would just tell you, take the opportunity to internalize, okay, what do I need from my work to be fulfilled? And that doesn't mean you go to work and you love everything about it. That doesn't exist. I'm sorry. Work sucks sometimes.
Yeah.
It can be rewarding, but sometimes it really sucks. But you got to find the right structure to be successful in, right? Yeah. And it's okay to have sucky days. It's not okay to have sucky weeks, months, years, right?
Nope.
So yeah, you're speaking to me. You're speaking my language, AJ.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll add on that, it's one of my most exciting. It's the most exciting part of this. I frankly feel. I think because it's something, number one, that I think you would agree with. It's something that's not talked about a lot. Number one, like I've spoken with, I want to give you a real number. I don't want to exaggerate. 50 plus active right now CHROs of 6+ years within the role. And they all tell me that they're now onto their second company because of what you just said. The first company, the structure, remember, and that's another thing I said, Kyle, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. The structure of the role, like the amount of decision-making ability they had, who they were reporting to, relationships with their fellow executives, like what they were working on day to day, the splits between strategic, fun, innovative, pushing the boundary work versus compliance, day-to-day, individual contributor work. Like just a lot of that stuff, they were just saying to me that, like you said, they really wished they would have been a little bit more thoughtful, because I think what they typically do is when we think about HR, we think we need to be everything. We think we need to be a somewhat of a 6 out of 10 skill level across the board in everything. And what I think is more impactful, think about the areas that you're like a 9 out of 10. And see if a company is uniquely having those issues right now, and then build a unique team around you to fill in the gaps. Because most of your time should be spent being a leader and a strategist and a thinker, not necessarily someone that's doing every single A to Z task. So I don't know if that makes sense, but.
I agree 100%. And if I look at myself in that context, I've definitely got some, maybe 8 out of 10, maybe a 9 out of 10 here and there. But there are definitely areas that either I'm not good at or I just don't enjoy. So I just hate spending time on it. But yeah, you fall, especially if you start as a generalist, you fall into that trap of thinking, I got to know everything, and I remember one of my early jobs, I was a generalist in a manufacturing facility. And, one of the tasks, one of the projects was go out and do these job descriptions. And then we're going to use those job descriptions to make sure we're hiring the right people and all this stuff. And I'm sitting here early in my career, didn't know any better. I'm like, I'm not going to understand what these jobs are supposed to be doing. But what I realized was if I just got the right people focused on that role and had them actually just be asked the right questions,
Mm-hmm.
then I could achieve the goal. It wasn't about me being an expert. It was about me being a connector
Yes.
and a question asker. That's
Yes.
probably not the right term. I'm sure there's a more articulate way to say that, but ask good questions. And the power of a good question is worth a whole hell of a lot more than 40 hours of research to try to become an expert and be mediocre at something.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you thought you were supposed to actually understand the depths of each role versus going and having conversations with those that are in those roles and interviewing them and building a relationship and building a little bit of rapport, and that I call it emotional glue to open them up to give you the depths and the rabbit holes, and then take that data and then make a really good job description that reflects the reality of the role.
Exactly.
Or-
And it was, yeah.
And if people are listening, did you see that? And you know this now, being where you are, but that's a big difference
And it's a whole lot easier too.
and more
And
fun.
yeah. And that's the only way, like, you get to a senior level. And here's the other piece of advice I would say for anybody who's thinking, okay, I really want to be a CHRO. Like, I get it. Like, it sounds glamorous. And you know what? It's a whole lot of fun. I really enjoy what I do. But you also have to get a little bit more disconnected from some of the things that I used to really enjoy in my career. I
Mhm.
used to spend a ton of time just talking to people. I mean, just talking, just shooting the breeze, building relationships with people on a really personal level because I had oversight over a smaller number of people. I mean, that's just the truth. So now that I'm in the thousands of employees that I'm supporting on a regular basis, it's really hard to do that because you have to be able to aggregate your cultural feeling. You have to be able to make sure that what you are focused on is for the greater good of the organization and the people, and you're balancing more of an equation versus just trying to do something for one person who you happen to have a great relationship with. And you can still build those relationships, but naturally there is a little bit of a difference there. And unfortunately, I think that sometimes that can come at the disconnection from the people. And so you have to be really, really intentional. You have to intentionally and actively focus on building relationships broadly across the organization. It's not okay to just focus on fostering the relationships of the people that you regularly interact with, because what will happen is you will get completely disconnected. So it's hard. Like, if you don't take the time to understand that, you will be actually hurting your organization actively without even knowing it, in my opinion. So it's not easy. And I
Yeah.
actually think that's why some people fail, honestly.
Yep.
I think it's easy to disconnect yourself from the actual people, culture, and to lose that connection. And the minute that connection's gone, you're over. It's over as far as
Yep.
I'm concerned. Sorry, now I'm getting on a soapbox, and I'll
No,
step
that's
back a
good.
little bit.
Hey, that's what I was hoping for, right? What I was hoping for is that this would resonate so much with you and so many other people that they just start thinking about it and start doing their own rants and things like that. So this is what I was hoping for.
Hey, man, if you want to rant, I'm your guy.
I love it. Rants are good.
I think it is so powerful. And I think what it really comes down to is, I think it's mentorship, right?
Yep.
And it's, if you do anything for anybody who is in your program or is interested in doing more with their organization or within HR, one of the most important things you can do is make sure they really want it,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're going to be all in on this career, I think you need to have that realistic job preview, or you're going to wake up one day and think, wow, I got here, but I'm miserable.
Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
So I want to ask, maybe I think one more question, because
Yeah.
I think it's one of your signature skills or strength that I just want to call out. And I think clearly you are a lifelong learner,
Yeah.
and you are working to become educated and enlightened, as opposed to just being focused on, I just need a paycheck I need, this many dollar signs, that kind of thing. So as you've approached the areas that you want to learn or the education that you want to focus on, how have you focused that? How do you approach, where to go next as you're learning?
I approach it in a couple of different ways. And this is also baked into the program as well, because I think what we're looking for is this 8-week experience is not the end all be all. So our recommendations is, and that's like the tangible outcome of the program is we're going to be giving each and every person their own individual playbook, not physically. I mean, not a tangible one. It's going to be obviously like in a, Microsoft Word document or how, a deck that they decide to design or however we decide.
Hey man, I want like a cool playbook, like, maybe not the Jets, but, something like that. Like it'd be cool to have a playbook.
That would be fun, actually. Within that playbook is going to be a lot of what you're talking about, which is, what do I do to continue to learn? What do I do to continue to grow? And so I think for me, my answer is a couple different things. Number one, to give advice to folks is I understand exactly to the T of what I want to learn, why I need to learn it, and how I learn best. So that audit and that deep dive is important. And then from there, what I've figured out is like, okay, I like to continue to research and stay on top of frameworks, best practices, case studies, just to push that information up in the top of my head, just to keep it in there. Not now that I'm learning it at such a deep level, because I'm not always applying it as much, but I think just having the language, having that context, having that information within my mind is always good to have. And then what I do is I try to take detailed notes around all of it as well, so I can refer back to it. I also suffer from severe ADD, so that's probably why I take those detailed notes. But I think it's also important because now I have my own playbook to refer to. So anytime any company may have an issue, I don't have to go off of what I've done in the past or go off of what I think I should do. I can look at literally in my computer here 7 to 12 different options and different ways to solve one issue that are laid out exactly to the T and that are not from my own point of view. They're from many points of views. And that's where I think a lot of folks like us get a little bit twisted here. We have mentors and we learn one way to go about employer branding, or learn one way to go about career mapping, or go one way to go about employee benefits, instead of having multiple ways and having a diverse skill set and a diverse perspective around these ways. And so you have the ability to contextually meet the moment where it is with a lot of actions that are contextual to those moments. And you have that data. So I have that. I dive into I remove ego very often. I've always told active heads of people or active folks in HR period that they should, beyond their day-to-day job, they should go to other companies in their network and say, I want to work for free. You have a separate set of issues. You have completely different contexts. You have completely different personalities. You're in a completely different market. I want to learn. I want to ingest. And then I think the last thing that I do is I take it seriously. And what I mean by that is, just like any athlete, I think professionals, we can atrophy. I think that's true. Like, I don't think enough people are realizing this. And I'm thinking of a couple of people right now in my head that I'm not going to say and put on the spot, but they have told me directly that what they do tactically, strategically as a leader, they're going off of frameworks, best practices, and experiences that they learned 15 years ago. I look at it very similar to an athlete. I'm a former football player. If you look at any great athlete nowadays, Odell Beckham, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, in the basketball world, LeBron James, if you look at them in the offseason, they train every single year to get new skill sets, to refine things. I'm not seeing enough CHROs or heads of people do enough of that, right? A lot of us are really leaning on our subconscious skill sets and our past experiences. Please believe me, there are so many new technologies, frameworks, best practices, points of views, ways to go about the things that you know how to do well that I believe you should learn and apply. And the only way you can do that is study every single day and learn every single day and have the bandwidth to test these new things out. And so that's also something I do as well.
Absolutely. And I agree 110%. And I think that, I don't know when it was, a few years ago, I was executing a project, and I was stuck in that thought process that, well, we just need to do this and execute this, and this is a best practice. And I was like, wait a minute. And I think everybody kind of hits a certain point in their career where they realize, wow, where did this best practice come from? Why is this best? And, what's interesting is, the specific topic I'm referring to is going through a talent assessment. And that's like 40 years old. And, going through like the force ranking exercise and, and rating people on, on their potential. And we just had a podcast guest on, Steve Brown, if you're familiar. And he's like, potential is, why do we do that? Everybody has potential. And to try to rank potential as higher or lower than others is an exercise in exclusion. And so why do we do it that way? And the honest answer is that's because that's what we were all trained to do. And it's the quote best practice. And so I think the minute that you realize the best practice doesn't mean best, it just means the way that everybody's done it for a long time, that's when your mindset can actually start to shift. And you know what? That best practice may be best for your organization, but it might not be. And that's where they need that thought leadership. And that's where a chief people person needs to be questioning. Yeah. Why do we do it? Because I guarantee you, people, cultures, the world of work is a whole hell of a lot different than it was 40 years ago. Yes. Right? There's no playbook for some of the stuff we've gone through over the last year or two.
Exactly.
So, got to keep learning.
I think the last thing I'll say here, and then we can go in any direction or wrap it up if you like. I think the last thing I'll say on that note, from an entrepreneurial lens, and I think this can be applied as a chief people officer or anyone internally for that matter. Kyle, every single company that I've started has all been from me questioning why things are the way they are. I mean, if I can just for 12 seconds, I'll go down the list here. My beyond brand execution, I was questioning why companies are not being more authentic and honest about the operational realities to talented applicants seconds after they apply. Why do we wait until they get into the company for them to figure out what it's actually like? Beyond resume, I was very confused of why professionals are not creating their own operational manual, if you will, of saying, here's who I am. And why are they always afraid to stick to those guns? Why are they always flexible in molding themselves to appease an organization? Why aren't they a little bit more confident within who they are actually as an operator and live into that? I'll give you last example with this company, Project 2030. I was very curious of why there is not a certification, a course, a playbook, a coach, someone saying, hey, you spent 7, 8, 9 years doing a lot of different things. Now you're being thrusted into trying to be a thought leader and a leadership, and a leader and a coach and a strategist in this space. Very steep curve here. Also, it's important to do a lot of professional development and have your own podcast, write blogs, be a speaker. There's no playbook right now on how to do that within the HR space and why that's important and how that's valuable. So I was always so curious. So all of this to get wrapped up is all around curiosity for me and just questioning what is with what could be.
I love it. And I think that's to take away for this podcast for anybody listening is, work to learn and you'll eventually find what you're looking for. So AJ, it's been absolutely wonderful reconnecting with you here. And we're coming to the end of our time here. So why don't we do a little handoff here? How can our listeners find out more about you and more about the 2030 project?
Yeah, so you can, a couple of different ways. Reach out to me. It's Anthony Vaughan, VAUGHAN at 2015 @gmail.com. That's the email. I'll still use my personal one for things like this because the way we're trying to fill up the cohort is in a very personal interaction here. You can find out what I'm doing at the E1B2 Collective.com. But the most important place I think people should go is find me on LinkedIn, reach out to me. It's Anthony Vaughan there as well. And I have a podcast as well, the E1B2 Collective podcast. So somehow, some way, if you do enough research, you'll be able to find me, get a hold of me, reach out to me. And as far as this program is concerned, I'll be very clear as well, Kyle. If you are listening and you are a very first time person that is looking to make that leap, looking to make that transition or that jump, at the very least, reach out and ask questions, and I'll be willing and happy to answer them.
Absolutely. AJ, sounds like a wonderful program. Keep on making some change in the world, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you.
All right, thanks.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.